Sometimes the most brilliant solution is the one that seems, well, completely backwards. Today, we're diving into a surgical procedure that does exactly that. It literally flips the shoulder joint on its head to solve a problem that, for decades, really had no good answer. So let's get right into how and why this remarkable procedure actually works. So here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start by really digging into the problem that standard surgery just couldn't fix. Then we'll explore the absolutely ingenious reverse solution, get into the physics that make it all possible, look at the hard engineering data behind its success, and finally, see what life is actually like for patients after they've had this done. All right, so first things first, let's set the stage. A standard shoulder replacement works beautifully for a lot of people. But there's this one specific group of patients for whom it was, quite frankly, a recipe for failure.
Yeah, it's the central question, isn't it? It seems totally counterintuitive. I mean, a ball is supposed to go into a socket, not the other way around. But the answer lies in a very specific and very debilitating medical condition.
And that condition is called rotator cuff arthropathy. Now, this isn't just your standard arthritis. It's a real double whammy. You've got the painful, grinding arthritis, plus the muscles that are supposed to control and stabilize the shoulder, the rotator cuff, are completely torn and just can't be fixed. Okay, so this slide really puts the mechanical problem in a nutshell. On the left, you can see how a healthy rotator cuff works. It's kind of like a harness, keeping the ball perfectly centered in that socket. But on the right, without that muscular harness, the ball of the arm bone just starts to drift upwards, rubbing against other bones, creating an unstable, painful mess. So you can imagine, if you put a standard replacement, a new ball and socket, in the normal spot, into that unstable environment, it's just destined to fail. The new ball still rides up. The new plastic socket gets loaded way up on its edge instead of evenly. This creates what surgeons call the rocking horse phenomenon, where these unstable forces literally start to pry that new socket loose from the bone. It just doesn't work. So surgeons were kind of faced with this mechanical dead end. They needed a totally radical new idea. And that idea? It was to stop fighting the problem and instead just completely change the rules of the game. This whole concept was pioneered way back in 1985 by Dr. Paul Gramont in France. Now, it took a while to catch on, but once it was introduced in the US, its adoption just skyrocketed. I mean, look at those numbers, a nearly threefold increase in only 6 years. That kind of explosive growth tells you one thing and one thing only. This was solving a problem that desperately, desperately needed an answer. And here it is. This is really the aha moment of the whole thing, the core concept. Instead of the ball being on the arm bone, the reverse design puts the ball, they call it a glenosphere, onto the shoulder blade itself. Then a new socket gets placed on the arm bone. They literally reversed the entire joint.
Okay, so why in the world does this kind of bizarre setup actually work?
Well, the magic isn't just in swapping the parts around. It's all about changing the physics of the entire shoulder. The crucial concept here is something called the center of rotation. By putting that new ball on the shoulder blade, surgeons move the joint's pivot point inward, closer to the body, and also a little bit down. And this tiny little shift in geometry, it has a massive, massive functional consequence.
And that consequence? It is all about the deltoid. That's the big, powerful muscle on the outside of your shoulder. By moving the pivot point, you effectively give the deltoid a longer lever to work with. This newfound mechanical advantage makes it so powerful that it can now lift the entire arm all by itself, completely bypassing the need for that non-functional rotator cuff. It's a brilliant biomechanical workaround.
So the concept is brilliant, for sure. But, real-world success, that all comes down to the nitty-gritty engineering details. And of course, the data that proves they actually work. And hey, don't just take my word for it. You can see right here how experts describe it. It all comes back to moving that center of rotation, which gives the deltoid muscle a longer fulcrum, basically a better lever, to do its job. I mean, check this out. This data shows the real-world impact of that engineering. A common complication is something called scapular notching, where the implant bumps against the shoulder blade. As you can see, early designs had a notching rate of almost 50%. But with one key tweak, moving the center of rotation slightly outward, that rate just plummeted to 7%. I mean, that is a huge improvement from a tiny little change. Here's another fantastic example from the Australian Joint Registry. Now, you'd think a longer stem going down the arm bone would be more stable, last longer, right? Makes sense. Well, The data shows the complete opposite. The shorter stems actually have a lower rate of needing a follow-up surgery at both 10 and 14 years. It's evidence just like this that is constantly refining these implants to get better and better results.
Okay, so we've covered the problem, we've covered the solution, we've looked at the engineering, but what does all this actually mean for the person whose shoulder it is? Let's talk about the outcomes.
All right, so what do the patients themselves think? Well, the most important number is always going to be satisfaction, and this is just stunning. 88% of patients report good or excellent outcomes 5 years or more after the surgery. Think about that. For someone living with just debilitating pain, an arm they can't even use, that number is absolutely life-changing.
And that satisfaction, it's driven by real, measurable results. On average, patients gain 56 degrees of forward arm elevation. Now, that might just sound like a number, but for someone who couldn't lift their arm to shoulder height, this means being able to reach into a cabinet or comb their own hair. It means getting their independence back.
Okay, and what about durability? How long does this thing last? Well, the data is pretty clear. There's about a 90% chance the implant will still be working just fine 10 years later. So this isn't some short-term fix. It's a real long-term solution.
So, with these kinds of incredible, life-changing results, you might be wondering, what does the actual surgery look like? Well, it follows a pretty logical sequence. The surgeon removes the damaged ball from the arm bone, prepares the socket, and fixes a base plate to it. That base plate becomes the anchor for the new ball, or glenosphere. Finally, the new socket is placed on the arm bone, and the new joint is created.
But of course, no surgery is ever a walk in the park. There are always risks. Dislocation is the most common early problem, though the rate is still pretty low. We've already talked about notching, which modern designs have really helped reduce. And like any joint replacement, there's a small risk of infection. And it is so important to remember that the implant is only one part of the solution. A dedicated, structured rehab program after the surgery is absolutely 100% essential for success.
And all of this brings us to a final, really thought-provoking question for the future. You see, the reverse shoulder was designed for a very specific, very difficult problem, but it has been so successful that surgeons are now exploring its use in other situations, like complex fractures in older patients. So the big question is, will this backwards solution continue to move forward and become the new gold standard for even more shoulder problems? It is truly a testament to a revolutionary idea in medicine.